Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Covenant United Methodist Church. I'm Reverend Ann Kemper, and I'm very proud and privileged to be the pastor here at Covenant. So we welcome you here to this sacred space. This is a day that's been coming. We've been looking forward to it for about 100 years. But we've really taken it seriously probably since February. I'd like to introduce Tim Avery, who's the chair of our council, and he's also been instrumental in seeing this afternoon come to bear fruit. We have cleaned the balcony just in honor of this event, so we're looking forward to it. We do have some housekeeping. There are restrooms just straight back, but you'll see the signs. And then exits. If we were to have to exit quickly, we have a front door and a back door. Actually, both ways. So if you need to exit, just head for those stairs. We do have an elevator. We will be serving a reception immediately following the concert. And believe me, if you want to take the edge off of supper, you're not going to want to miss this reception. We will have an opportunity for you to make a free will offering to the student travel fund for Eastman. And there's a wooden box with a slot in it if you would like to make a contribution to that after the concert. Also, to let you know that we welcome you back at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings. We are here in person, and for those of you joining us online, we do live stream most of our worship services. In addition to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings, we offer a time of reading children's stories and also reflection on Scripture. So we try and keep you involved and connected to our online congregation. So once again, welcome to this place and enjoy.
I would also just like to say thank you so much to Eastman School. Andrew, Ryan, and Charles are going to really bring to life an exquisite piece of instrumentation. You think about what lasts 100 years these days.
Yeah, true.
Very few things. And I also want to thank, really, Ann and I, we did a bit. The true spearhead is right there in the back in front of the radiator, Margaret Ann Milne. Margaret Ann plays the organ for us many times a month. She has been advocating to keep this beautiful piece of history alive, and not just alive, but working really well. I wasn't there, but I heard that some of the Eastman students who got to tinker with it a little bit found it adequate.
Oh,
good. So that's thanks to Margaret and her advocacy for keeping something really, really cool alive in this community. So without further ado, thank you, Andrew, thank you, Ryan, thank you, Charles. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for being here and celebrating the 100th anniversary of this beautiful Austin pipe organ. During my undergraduate studies, I was organist at a United Methodist Church in Bloomington, Illinois, which had a 1991 Austin organ. And so there are aspects of this organ which are similar and some which are different. But we have just had such a wonderful time getting to know this instrument over the past couple of weeks. It's a real treasure and indeed worth celebrating. That piece you just heard is Every Time I Feel the Spirit, arranged Richard Elliott. I picked this piece for here because Richard Elliott was an alumni of the Eastman School of Music. So he's well acquainted with Rochester. He is now the organist for the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square in Salt Lake City, Utah. So this organ is not just meant for repertoire, but it's really ideal for leading hymn singing. And again, I've accompanied many Methodist congregations, and I love how strongly they can sing. So I hope that you don't prove me wrong. This next hymn is one of my favorites, Holy, Holy, Holy. Please stand as you are able for this hymn. Feel free to sing parts on verses 1 and 2 and melody on verses 1 and 4. next piece on the program is a little more lyrical and showing off the beautiful, soft, colorful stops of this organ. This is an arrangement by George Shearing, the British jazz pianist, and he did not actually write this originally for the organ, but it was transcribed for the organ after the fact. This is "There is a happy land, far, far away, where saints in glory stand, bright, bright as day."
Well, good afternoon, and can I second Andrew's wishes so far that it's just such an honour and a joy to be here and presenting music to you all on such a special and authentic instrument. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second, but firstly, I wanted to talk about the reason that you may feel obliged to give some money at the end of this concert, and that's for the Eastman Travel Fund. Some of you may be wondering what that is, and part of today is actually celebrating that, and that is how unique and special original instruments are. We're celebrating an amazing 1925 Austin organ, but across the world, organs are just as unique, just as special, and just as historically important and musically inspiring for organists wishing to learn the great repertoire. I myself have benefited from the Travel Fund twice already in my 2 years at Eastman, and they were both this summer. The first one was for a life-changing trip for 3 days in Paris, although having grown up only 200 miles away from it, by that point I had never visited the city. But this is such an important city and culture for organists to understand, and to play in the churches where Charles-Marie Widor and great names like that were musicians is really a life-changing experience. It is almost as close as you can get to going and meeting the people themselves, and that's an original organ from the 1860s. The second time the Travel Fund supported me was in September, when I travelled to Germany, and I played a series of historic organs around Freiberg, which is in the southwest of the country. Not a single one of those instruments was built after 1740, and that is really quite special. And a lot of these organs are exactly the ones that Bach would have known. And so there's really something special about that as musicians, because they are so different, and they are so unimaginably inspiring and unique to experience. What's great about the organ, and what I hope you'll get a sense of tonight, is that the organ is really a time machine. When you hear an instrument like today, which has not been changed, it sounds exactly the same as to those who heard it in 1925. I had that exact same experience with organs in Germany from 1712, and the exact same experience with organs in France from the 1860s. These are the exact sounds and the exact kind of emotions that get brought up that they felt back then that we get to experience now. So for organists who want to teach, who want to perform, and who want to move people in every situation, to experience these organs that you can't experience anywhere else but in those places, is where that Travel Fund becomes essential. I'm sure you'll hear a bit more about that from other players who've described how they've been affected by that fund, but when I say it's life-changing, that is no overstatement. So thank you for your potential support in that cause. When I saw the poster that said that we were celebrating organists from 4 different continents, I felt that was a good way for me to program some English music. And so I'll be playing the music of Percy Whitlock. Now, I grew up in the southeast of England, and only 15 miles away from me was the city of Rochester, which is quite a funny connection. But in the nearby town, only a few miles away, a man called Percy Whitlock was born, and he was a chorister throughout his entire childhood in Rochester Cathedral. And then his first job as organist was as assistant organist in Rochester Cathedral. So I feel like there's a very fun, special connection there between the two. What's also interesting is that for us, Austin's in Rochester is not necessarily a rare find. There's an organ in Third Presbyterian Church which has the remnants of an Austin, so you can hear some sense of that organ builder there. There was famously an enormous Austin organ in the Eastman Theatre, which was the largest theatre organ, you could say, ever built in America, which is a very significant prize to have. And then there was also the Austin organ in Asbury that you can still hear today. But all of these have been changed, and this is the only example I've ever experienced so far of an original 20s Austin. And what a special experience it really is. What's nice about that mention about Eastman Theatre is that these organs are not just for church, but they were also built for entertainment in kind of secular venues. And Whitlock had a similar experience as an organist. He was a church organist, but also a theatre musician. And he was the organist of the Pavilion in Bournemouth, where he'd play light music and music for fun and entertainment. And I think we'll get a very heavy sense of that in the next 5 short pieces. Each of them are little character works and very individual in nature. And while I could describe each one, the one that stands out to me is the little scherzo that you'll hear, which is number 4, which the only little annotation from the composer we have of that is it was written for a particular organ with 2 ripping flutes. And so when you hear those 2 ripping flutes, you might be able to try and think, yes, I agree. So here is the 5 short pieces of Percy Whitlock. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out on a lovely fall day for this organ concert, which is a very meaningful kind of event for us as well, performers, because we didn't know about this instrument for the longest time. I have been at Eastman since 2017, and I've never heard of this instrument. And now that it's like an achievement unlocked for me personally. So I am actually the Hong Kong representative out of today's performers. Um, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experience with the travel fund, because I was also a beneficiary of that. I went to, this is in 2019, I went to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, to Alkmaar, and also to the region of Groningen, where we have really, really old North German style and Dutch Baroque instruments, some as early as in the 1500s in Alkmaar. And I also went to France, to Paris and Toulouse, and played wonderful romantic instruments from the 19th century, and also some Baroque instruments from the 18th century and even earlier. But today I am going to be playing some really contemporary pieces that's only composed within the past 30 years. And the first piece I'm going to play is by a composer probably you might be familiar with, because he was actually organist here back in the 90s, and this is Aaron David Miller. He used to be organist here, and he also studied at Eastman. He did his bachelor there. And this is a piece by him called Fireflies. And it is actually a very suitable piece to play in this season because it has some spooky vibes to it. And especially in the middle section of the piece. And you're also going to be hearing the chimes on this organ. Thank you. Next piece we're going to play is really fun. It's something a little bit different. It is a classical piece, but also a jazz piece, all in one. The composer is a Hungarian composer called Gadonier, and he wrote this piece called Mozart Changes. And if you are familiar with jazz, you might have heard of Coltrane Changes. And so this is his way of jazzing up Mozart. And the original piece is a piano sonata by Mozart, the D major sonata in the last movement. And you're going to hear it kind of, very original, very much like Mozart in the opening. And then suddenly the pianist or the organist had a few sips of wine, and then and then it much sounds like something you will hear in a piano bar or a jazz bar.
Well, I believe it's that time in the program for our next audience participation opportunity. And what better way to do that by doing a hymn. Of course, this organ is great at repertoire, and I think hopefully you're being moved and inspired and engaged by the sounds that you're hearing, but the primary purpose of this organ was to accompany singing and worship. So let's now join in one of the real great hymns, I think, the Church's One Foundation, with a tune by a man whose surname needs no introduction. I'd invite everyone to sing unison in the outer parts, in the outer verses, and please, if you feel able, join in harmony in the inner verses. So here is the Church's One Foundation.
All right. I'm going to close out our program today with two pieces by Horatio Parker, an American composer, since I'm representing the American part of this concert. Horatio Parker was professor at Yale University, where he taught music theory and at one point organ. These two pieces have become real favorites of mine, and I was able to play them earlier this year in Boston on some 19th century instruments with which Horatio Parker might have been familiar. That was with the Eastman department. We go on regional tours every year, and some of us have had the opportunity to travel to Europe. I've had the great fortune to go to Paris 2 times for organ tours, and this past summer to North and Central Germany, this last time being partially funded by the Eastman Travel Fund. So we use this fund to help augment our education. We can learn a lot about these instruments reading in books and from what our teachers tell us, but we learn even more from playing them in person, feeling the same keys and hearing the same sounds that the great composers heard. So we thank you for being here today and for considering donating to the Eastman Travel Fund. Here is Scherzino and Festival Prelude by Horatio Parker.
blessing. That was worth waiting 100 years for. I want to remind you that there's a wooden box right back there for your offering to their travel fund, and also to invite you to a reception in the parlor, which is back in that part of the building on this floor. But thank you again for attending and being a part of this special day. And Ryan and Charles and Andrew, you're just you blessed us. And they will be back in the reception area for you to visit if you have questions or accolades to share with them as well. Thanks again.